Hello, today we're going to be talking about MVC in action. So this first week we kind of talked about MVC at a high level, kind of like that introduction to MVC class. And we really wanted to revisit the ideas because at this point you should have been working in Rails for about a week now. And we want to bring up and talk about these ideas again because we want to see you kind of use the knowledge that you've gained this past week and kind of apply these ideas again and see how it kind of works out. So the first thing I want to do is kind of warm up, and I would suggest pausing the video and diagramming the MVC flow and how each part relates to the other. Include what logic area belongs to each part of the MVC model. Each area that you diagram out should have examples of what responsibilities you should live there. And what we can do as a bonus is that include file names for each area of the project you're working on in that diagram. So you can go ahead and pause the video here, and when we unpause it, I'm going to go through and describe what happens when someone makes a request to your application. So I'm going to wait like 5 seconds. Cool. So this is our computer. And what we're going to do is that we're going to assume we have our first project, Adopt, Don't Shop, and we have a collection of pets on this server. And so when we want to go grab all the pets, we send a GET request to the URI/pets. And this cloud here, it's the internet. And through the magic and wonders of the internet, and later on in this module, we're going to talk about how that works. But it ends up to our server, this little box here. And so our server, what it does is it sees that we have this incoming request with the verb of get and the URI of pets, right? And so it's going to refer to our routes.rb to figure out what we want to do with it. The job of the routes file is to take that incoming request, in this case it's get pets, and we're going to find a matching controller action. If we're being RESTful and we want to get a list of all the pets, then we know that get pets is going to map over to the pets controller in the index action. So now we are at the controller and the appropriate action, right, which in this case is the index action. So now this controller in the index action is like, well, I'm an index. That means that I'm going to get all of the pets. So we're going to reach out to the pet model in the pet RB file, and this pet model is going to go out and get all the pets for me. This model uses active record and the PG gem, which contacts the database. In this case, what we've talked using Postgres. Postgres database, and that database is going to get us all the pets. Database sends it back to the model then presents it back to the pets controller file. In the pets controller file, it did that pet.all. It now stores it in the probably like the @pets instance variable. With that instance variable, it has all the pets in this active record association, this collection. It assembles information and it uses our ERB template, the index.html.erb. Index.html.erb because we are in the index action. A reminder that the big guiding principle of Rails is that we use convention over configuration, which means that if we have an index action, an index method in our controller, it's going to look for the file name called index.html.erb. When we learn the language that Rails works in, we can save so much more time rather than having saying like, oh, I want you to go to this directory and then this in the views folder and pull up the index.html.erb. We don't have to do that anymore. It just does that automatically for us. And using that template, and the assets, it's going to build us some HTML, essentially a string of text that has all the things that we want, and then it'll take that HTML, generate that response, and sends it back to the client. And this is kind of like the entire, what happens when entirety of a request response cycle whenever we go to a web page. In this case, when we're trying to get all the pets out of our Adopt, Don't Shop. So overall, this is the big picture of how everything works. And we want to talk about how these three things kind of interplay. The controller is where we want to keep our business or application logic. Our controller, as we've seen, is kind of like the traffic cop. It grabs the information from the model and therefore the database. It takes that information. It then integrates that into our view. And then when it has all of that stuff all together, it then sends it back out. Right? It does this based on the incoming request, right? Each controller method knows exactly what model or models it needs to write or get user data. There's going to be situations where you're going to have to grab information from two models, put them together, and then send them back out through the view and back to the client. It's going to do that. like in our data, in our controller, we're only going to want to do simple lookups in the database, or we're going to create a resource, edit a resource, destroy a resource. We're doing very small things. We should not be doing any data manipulation. The model is going to do that for us. And so that brings us to the model. And the model is where we want to store our data logic. The model is responsible for interactions with the database. Things like calculations, filtering data from or other manipulation. You would create a method in the model, like if you had a collection of pets and you want to know what the average age of the pet was, you would put that logic in there. If you wanted it to return only the adoptable pets or only the unadoptable pets, you would put that kind of filtering inside the model. Now the thing is that model should only return raw data in an appropriate data structure, usually an array, sometimes a hash. What that means is that you kind of want to return objects back. You don't kind of want to return partial information. And like a model should also not alter data. For example, when we're calculating the average age of a student or whatever, it should not do any rounding or anything like that. It should do the math and send that math back. You could force things into a type, like if you want to come back, make sure that comes back a float, but the idea is that if we want to round stuff, that should be happening at the view layer. Like we want to send the most raw data we can back out, and then the view layer is where we make things useful. So we have the view layer, which is the presentation logic, right? There should be very little logic in our views. The big goal of a view is that it's going to take the data given to it by the controller and then present it in a way that's useful to users. For example, when we get all the pets back, right? Are we just gonna throw the pets on the screen? No, like what we're gonna do is we're probably gonna throw an H1 that says all pets. We're gonna like iterate through it and use like bullets or some kind of spacing so that people can read it in a way that's like visually pleasing to users. And that's the kind of information that we want to see in the view. Generally, in the view, we're just gonna see a couple of if-else statements, some conditionals, and some basic iteration. Like for example, when we are dealing with a collection of pets, we want to iterate over that collection in order to see all of them individually. One important thing to note is that a view may call instance methods from the model class, but should avoid class methods where possible, except in rare circumstances. So in the view, we should be calling instance methods on objects that are sent to it, but never reaching out to the database directly. We want to use the controller as the intermediary, what presents the information. And that pretty much covers MVC in action. What I would suggest doing next is going to the end of the lesson plan. We have some stuff there. We have an exercise where we give you some code. It's going to be in the context of an application that tracks comedians and their Netflix specials. A comedian has an age. An age is an attribute of a comedian, and a comedian has specials, and a special has a runtime, which is essentially the length. The relationship between the comedian and the specials is one to many. And that is it. Thank you.